Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby podcast, our final podcast of the season. We'll be taking a little break after this afternoon for our summer holidays, but we'll be back sometime in July. We're going to be pretty certain looking ahead to the Rugby World Cup because there is a lot to get through. Jonny Holland is with me for this final pod of the season. Jonny, thanks a million for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming back. We don't get you on the pod too much, but look, obviously only one place to start on this podcast. Cape Town, Saturday evening. Munster finishing off the URC in style. 1914 winners against the Stormers. First title for the province since 2011. Before we get into the nitty gritty of the game, obviously some of those players involved were like old teammates of yourselves. I'm guessing, would you even coach maybe a couple of the younger lads down in Cork Con or something like that? But you know quite a few of those people involved on a personal level. How happy were you as a former Munster player to finally see them get over the line?
Yeah, I was delighted for them. Like, I mean, there's a massive blend of fellas that, there's only a couple of fellas hanging on. I'd say that I play with. But
there's more than a couple. I mean, you're talking.
No,
Yeah,
there's a good few. There's a good few.
There.
Like the likes of the older brigade, like Earlsey, Pete, Archer, Murray, that crowd. But like the Scanners have been there quite a while as well. There's a few of them that have had a lot of heartache, I suppose, in Munster. The jersey, the semi-finals in Europe, the 2017 final, I remember being at that. 16-17, wasn't it? So that was the start of the year I retired, so I was up at it. But like, I don't think anyone thought it was going to go so far before they had actually won any silverware. I mean, 2011, I remember watching that before I got involved, so at a senior level. So like it was a long time ago. And but there's a lot of talk about like the players that were coming through and a lot of Munster potential, but like potential has to be, it has to go towards winning at some stage. Like, and I think that's the greatest thing for Munster is that they're, they've got such a good group of players coming through. The spine of those younger fellas, Diarmuid Barron, Hodnett, Jack Crowley, Gavin Coombs, these fellas. There's loads more. There's loads of them that are, when you start looking at the older Munster teams, like you've got a halfback pairing of Casey and Crowley. I don't want to make many comparisons, but you've got a back row that's really, really strong. It's very easy to start making comparisons for like towards the last successful team as well. Like, but I think they're just in a really good place with the blend of youth and experience that they have now as well.
Yeah, and it's like, as you mentioned there, with the likes of some of the younger players, but obviously, like, it's an old cliche, winning is a habit, but losing is also a habit as well. And if you were the likes of, Craig Casey, Gavin Coombs, John Hodnett, those players who, while they're young, they're not very young. They're 24. Yeah. Gavin Coombs is 25. For some of those players, if they were to have gone another couple of years before, a couple of years without winning a trophy, all of a sudden you're heading into that far side of the 20s, and again, losing is a habit. But the good thing about it is now that for a lot of these young players, it is, okay, I know a couple of them would have won with Ireland and stuff like that, but it's their first taste of winning a trophy. I was even down at the homecoming on Monday. We were chatting to a couple of players, and like someone like Mike Haley, for example, who I think is about 28, 29 now, he was saying this is the first trophy he's won as a professional player, not just with Munster, but going back to his time in Sale as well. So I think you could probably kind of forget the fact that for a lot of these players, it's a first taste of winning a trophy since they were probably 17 or 18 in schools or clubs.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, people don't realize how little you win as a professional player. There's some players that you think they've all the accolades and all the trophies, and some of the internationals have them, and the Leinster internationals in particular have them. But there's probably a lot more people that go through the professional career without winning something. Like, Connacht won it in, was that 15, 16? So like, have they won anything since, and have they been close, or will they be close? For some lads, you can't see that. Like Jack Carty, maybe someone in the middle of that squad, you can't really see him winning a trophy with Connacht as it currently stands. I suppose we said that about Munster only 6 months ago, So,
and about Munster only about 6 weeks ago. Never mind.
So I said it more recently, yeah. So it's it's a massive tournament for those guys, and to get silverware as a professional player, I think it's a massive monkey off their back, I suppose, and it can be a very successful career once you get the first one. Hopefully, they back it up with, like, I'm not saying they have to go back to back or anything, but I think from their perspective, they will have a bit more confidence that they can go and actually play for the next ones with less pressure now, But I think it was more so even because it was such a barren run, like the way they played to get there, I think was absolutely phenomenal. And like, yeah, we probably would have had questions definitely before Christmas, but plenty since Christmas as well. Like, and the way they played against Leinster away from home to get the final opportunity for Jack to kick that drop goal. They did the exact same thing after Gavin Coombs got his block, which I'm not sure if they're still talking about it, but they should. But he got his block down and they got the ball back. But if you see the rugby they played from there, they didn't play within themselves. And I think that's the most pleasing thing. And maybe that's where Mike Prendergast and these guys are suddenly starting to be taken a lot more seriously.
Yeah, it's funny, and on the try, like I was looking back at it there last night, and it's remarkable. There's about 3 different spots during those phases of play before John Hodnett scores, in between the block and John Hodnett scoring, where it looks like Munster have either are about to knock on the ball or are about to lose it. And it's the risk reward side of things. We saw where the risk doesn't pays off in large parts in that game against Leinster, where they kept taking those risks and it wasn't working, and they got the payoff eventually. They probably should have won by more, but the important thing was they got the payoff eventually. And crucially on Saturday as well, the payoff came eventually. And it probably is I think it's nice to see a win for positive rugby, never mind just for Munster, but it's nice to be able to show teams and show coaches that, you know what, Munster mightn't have the tight five to compete with a Toulouse or a La Rochelle, but they're not trying to make up for that by just retreating into their shells and just playing a territory-based game and picking off the occasional score when they can. They're playing to the strengths that they have, which is players now that are capable of coming in off wings and finding space, players that are able to create space for each other, players that have good ball skills, that are able to move the ball on and open up the holes somewhere else. So I don't know. I think obviously we're both speaking. I'm neutral, but obviously people know I'm from the province of Munster. You are a former Munster player, so there's obviously it's not the most impartial of podcasts, but at the same time, I would say for a lot of neutral people looking on, it probably is good to see a team playing attractive, positive rugby, getting the rewards.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think that's been the great strength of Ireland recently, is that they kind of tore up that playbook in terms of having to be the biggest front five, or having the biggest team on the pitch and moving teams around the place. So I think the provinces have followed that. They're all slightly different systems and everything else, and they've got different personnel and different cohesion. And we might go into that in a minute with the Irish squad, but like the cohesion within a squad is important. And I think Munster have gotten to a point now where they are suddenly competing with a brand of rugby that is actually very nice to watch. So it obviously is good for rugby, but it's good for Ireland in general. Like, I mean, I was in a funny position where, as an ex-Munster player and supporter and all the rest of it, and supposedly having no biases, but like I was actually shouting for Leinster in the European Cup. Not that I've never shouted for them before, but like it was a weird one going all out, thinking that not even from an Irish perspective, I just thought very good team, play a very good, attractive style of rugby, and the players I thought deserved it to get there eventually. But like I'd hope that other Irish provinces, well, not that I really care to hope that either, but I think Irish people will see that it's beneficial for Irish rugby if there's someone else, being successful first and foremost, but also, breaking away from the monotony of Leinster being the only team we're talking about in a successful way. I think we nearly got there with Ulster. They were starting to do some really nice things at one stage, but obviously things went a bit pear-shaped up there as well. When Connacht won it, it was unbelievable. It was more like a Leicester City winning the Premier League, but like it was still,
Same year as well. I remember it was, within a couple of weeks of each other. It was just a bizarre time in sport.
A good sporting year. But like it's always good to break that up, even as much as I like, the front runner going and doing the business, because I don't like them in general in sport, because I don't like them ever. The pressure comes on, they're expected to win, and it's good to see that, when it's deserved. But like you also like to see someone who's not expected to do it. And Munster were not expected to do it. Like what they did on the road in the last 6 weeks or so has been phenomenal. But doing it, like you said, in the way that they played away from home, sticking to the style of rugby, I think the coaches can be. It's probably going to be a very sweet one for coaches because of the way they did it in the end. They didn't grind it out, or they went to the very end, but like the way they scored their tries or got their scores, I think it's it's going to be a pleasing one to transfer from a coach to the players and allowing them to stick with it, and the players having the confidence to stick with it. That's the best part, I'd say, for them.
Yeah, the coach. I was going to ask about the coaching there, and like putting your own coaching hat on. It must be a fascinating to look and see how it all changed. Where it like they in terms of a team, they are chalk and cheese to what they were 12 months ago. And we would have heard for quite a few months from Graham Rowntree, Mike Prendergast, Dennis Leamy and Andy Kyriakou about the changes that were made, not just to the game plan itself on the pitch, but what they were doing in training all season as well, where they were bringing a real up-tempo to the style of training, where there were less breaks. They wanted to see how players were reacting when they were mentally fatigued. And obviously you could see it in the first 6-7 weeks of the season where the players were really, really struggling out there. And eventually, bit by bit, it came along to the point where they now have kind of shown against Leinster and have shown against the Stormers and probably Glasgow as well that they're fitter now than a lot of the teams out there. But, and as Mike Prendergast, we asked him as well on Monday night, he said these were the days that he came back to Munster for, to be able to walk out and bring a trophy out of Thomond Park. And he did admit that these days have probably arrived a little bit earlier than he and all of them were expecting as well. But purely from a coaching point of view and with your own experiences of coaching, it must be interesting to see how they've put that plan in place.
Yeah, like I went up there last summer and saw that plan. Like they were telling us about it. We were able to preview their session, what they were going to do. And obviously you're looking at the rugby that the players are playing and the setup that they had and the drills and everything else. But I was just watching coaches for quite a while and they were breathless. Like they were always on the go. S&C staff, like support staff, were there to facilitate them to get the highest pace into their session. And like it's something that, as a coach you take away from. They have a load of time together during the week. We've a lot less at our level, but they still operate at that pace. It was something that we needed to try and start doing as well. Or it was a bit of an eye opener anyway. So I like the way they did that. Obviously, it took a lot of time because that was before, I think it was the week of one of the preseason games, and then some of the preseason games went well. Like they were, one half went well and the other half didn't. Like in a sense, there was a bit of a comeback in bowling wasn't there. So you could see hints of it, but you couldn't really see it throughout. And like we've seen that from Munster before, they win a load of league games, but when it really mattered, they didn't really get there. So I think that's obviously very pleasing that they stuck with it when things got tough. And to be fair, like I think they were always saying that the belief was in the squad and everything else, even when people outside, even people like us that maybe should have had a bit more belief, didn't fully believe that they were going to get there. But the interesting thing for me is that there was a bit of a shake up in terms of selection at different stages. And like, the easy, and people from the outside called for it, I'll get this fella in and get that fella in and just rip up the script and whatever else. But like, I think, the confidence is the great.
Sorry to interrupt, but when you're losing matches, it is bold to be sticking with some of those selection calls.
Yeah, it is absolutely. But I think the confidence of Jack Crowley will say, and I've obviously been vocal enough on him. He's a player that I've been lucky to coach as opposed to have coaching to that level. But like he was just riding such a wave that it was inevitable he was going to go in ahead of Joey. And like I felt for Joey and I still do because he's a great player and he's been through a lot. But Jack just seemed to be, it was inevitable that he'd get there. And I think the confidence that he brought into their game, maybe even blind confidence, like he hasn't had the setbacks that some other fellas have had. And, you leverage that. Likewise, Craig Casey was the other one that I think that contrast is unbelievable from the coaching team, because the easy one to do would be, oh, it's not really going well for us. Bring in past zippy Craig Casey and throw the cat amongst the pigeons. But actually they went back to the Conor Murray style at scrum half with the youth and confidence of Jack Crowley and everything else. But he's brought so much control to his game as well that blend really, really worked. And like Craig came off the bench and added what we know he's going to add. But like, I think if you saw kind of blind changes, like, change the halfback pairing, they're the ones that are the young up and coming, and that's where we're going to go for the future. Fair enough. But like, they actually made better decisions than that, kept Murray there and got Jack in there. I think it was, and used Jack at 12 as well. He was playing a lot of rugby within that team for the last couple of weeks. And I think there's a lot that he can be proud of as well, like,
Yeah, and on a few of those players, so Crowley and Shane Daly and Calvin Nash as well. Like, we've spoken about how exciting some of the rugby it is that they're playing, but in the final, a lot of what they did to put themselves in good positions was the simple stuff really well, like kicking and chasing, which obviously was a big part of, the previous regime, but maybe it was just too big a part of the game plan. But if you look back at the game against the Stormers, the amount of change they got from Conor Murray and Crowley, and I think, to be honest, particularly Conor Murray, I thought his kicking was, if you're talking one specific game, it was about as well as he's kicked in a few years. But just putting the balls into the right places and for some reason, the Stormers were just offering themselves zero protection against the likes of Daly and Nash running up the wings and contesting for those kicks. And the amount of ball Munster won back off that put themselves in the position to attack. So it goes back to the game plan of, while it's exciting, it's not just blindly swinging for the fences. There's there's a lot of thought that's gone into it.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, Calvin Nash, I remember Calvin coming on the scene and he was young and exciting, and he's had to go and reinvent himself a small bit to get back to where he is now. And he's playing some unbelievable rugby, So, like, you look at the kicks that Murray was putting up, like, Calvin just got into the air and got into the space. He didn't exactly win them all back on his own, but like, he got into the space and disrupted it, and the ball broke and Munster won it back. So he's not just about chasing balls either. Like, he can actually play a lot of rugby. He's very physical. That was one thing I was very impressed with him when he was back inside an Irish camp and getting a bit of game time, was how physical he got. And I think that's really after adding to his game. But like Shane Daly, another fella, obviously played at Russ and Con, played a lot at 13. And you can see that in his game coming off the wing. He's very comfortable on the ball. He's very comfortable taking fellas on. I remember bringing in a couple of plays where the 15 would run a kind of a tighter line back against it and get through what I would think is getting through gaps. And Shane was like, no, get the ball into my hands. I want to get on the outside. Like, he's very comfortable getting on the outside like that, but also very comfortable with the ball in his hands and playing other people into space as well. Obviously, that ball back inside for John Hodnett, like, very easy for him to try and, step like he does and get into the corner. But having the wherewithal, I suppose, to get the ball to someone else who's in a better space. And that's obviously the way Munster are training at the moment. Where's the space now? How do you get the ball there? And it's fairly evident. But like, you said yourself, it was, they may have knocked on a ball. We could be talking about a very different thing. Knock on the ball there throughout that, and all of a sudden Earlsey might retire without another trophy. Pete, obviously very, very frustrated with the international success and nothing at his club. So like, to get over the line like that has changed the narrative altogether. And hopefully those guys can leave that narrative behind them as well.
One of the things Graham Rowntree said before the match, and one of the things he said after the match as well, and it's completely true. Munster they don't do things the easy way. There's never anything straightforward about Munster, whether they win or lose. Like 6 away games to finish off the season. 4 of them won. 1 of them was drawn, and the first one of those against the Sharks in the Champions Cup was beaten. And of that 6 games as well, 4 of them were in South Africa, let alone just being away from home. As a player, like, can you ever remember being on that stretch or run of away games in a row?
No, and you'd feel it as well. Like, even at club level here, when you're on the road for a couple of games, you're delighted to get home. Like, so I don't remember having a time where I was away, at any level to that degree. But again, like, if you look into the Andy Farrell kind of school of thought, is that what got them there? That they were on the road so much, they just got used to it. And when the final was in South Africa, I'm sure they were shrugging their shoulders, like they didn't really care. So like, that's obviously the part that it's the most interesting part of the journey for the end of the year. But like, that's the part that got them over the line in the end of it. But like, it's interesting. You're on the road that long, and you still have a guy like Stephen Archer who's putting in serious minutes. At the tail end of his career. Not to insult him, but like the offloading, how he's changed his game in around the ruck, the stuff that he was up to. He's a very fit guy that people don't realize. He's a big man, and he's very fit. If you do a running test, he's always able to do it. He's a lot more capable than people look at. Oh, prop, not going to be fit, not going to be able to play ball. He absolutely can. Like, and I think he's shown that. So there's been really interesting case studies within how Munster have changed themselves in the last couple of months, weeks even, and who stepped up. But he played a lot of minutes in the first, in the last South African kind of back to back as well. Like, didn't he? I don't know if he even came off maybe late on.
He played 280 minutes in the.
Yeah. So that's incredible for a guy at is he 35? I'm not sure. So like as a tight head prop, that's absolutely outrageous. So people like that deserve a lot of credit as well. Like,
and then for a couple of players that I did want to mention as well, players that are leaving. Like, I mean, Malachi Fekitoa, it's been a bizarre season for him, and it's probably his entire season has probably summed up Munster's entire season, where like he was brought in, like he was a player that wasn't signed ultimately by these coaches. So that obviously is a bit of an awkward situation to start out with. And I would say, by his own admission, like, looked to be struggling for those first couple of months in a team that was struggling as well, to be fair. Then you hit a block by November where he wasn't even getting into match day 23s. it was becoming fairly obvious that Munster weren't picking up the option of his second year of it on his contract. He gets his deal with Benetton, and I think we have probably seen down the years there have been plenty of players who've been in a situation like that who have probably down tools, put the feet up. They've got their contract sorted for next year. I'm all right, but since probably the end of January or even early-ish in January as well, he's been absolutely phenomenal, to the point where, particularly in this playoff run that Munster have had, he's been one of, if not their best players.
Yeah, he's been class. And like I remember the preseason games when he came on, the absolute excitement around him coming onto the pitch, because obviously we know where he's come from, what he's achieved and everything else. So like there was a huge excitement around him. And then I think, I believe that he was just one of these guys that was going to get it. He looked like he tried his heart out around the contact and just worked great in that preseason game. It's like he was trying to impress, the Munster faithful, because he knew what they were about. And if he got them on side, he was going to be a bit of a star. And I thought he'd be a legend of the club at that stage, like genuinely. And then to go through that patch around Christmas time was obviously very difficult. But I remember speaking to Alex McHenry about him. Alex spent time with him in Wasps, and was just saying how this was before he went through any selection struggle. But like Alex was saying how good he is to the fellas around him and everything else, and the amount that he gives back. So it's not really a surprise when he's not downing tools by the end of the season, and he's after turning a season around. Like the hit on was a Dean Farrell out on the edge. That's the kind of stuff that you're expecting from him. But also he's very strong in contact and he can get his hands free and everything else. But like I think anyone who would know him closer, and like I don't know the man at all, but from the stories that I'm hearing, he's not going to be someone that's just going to give up on it. I think he gets the whole culture of the club, and it's disappointing to see him going. Obviously it's after finishing on such a high, but it's good for someone like that to have such good memories of the club by the end of it as well.
Yeah. So what are the areas Munster have to look at now so that they can turn this trophy into more trophies down the line? Like where are the things that need to be tweaked? Like they probably are, as Mike Prendergast said, they're probably ahead of schedule in terms of delivering what they'd set out to. But how do you make sure you stay ahead of that curve?
Well, it's difficult because they are going to get a bit of turnover. We don't know what's happening with Keeler's. Malachi Fekito is gone. I know there's replacements there, but like, you're going to get some turnover. So the first thing you're going to have to do is, make sure that turnover doesn't affect what you've been building. But then as well, like the coaches are saying, it is early and they're kind of, I wouldn't like to say a transitional period, but in terms of them getting their own way around the squad, you do expect year 3 to be the successful one, and they're after doing it initially. So like the goalposts have now moved, that they need to maybe not go back to back, but they can't be disappointing next year. And then there's a target on their back as well, because now they're the champions, So like it's going to be very, very difficult. But I think if you kind of sit back and say this is our style and go and play that way next year, everyone's going to know that by now. Like it's hard because there's European competition as well. But when you're the champions, people adopt or adapt their game to beat your style as well. So like everyone's going to be wondering what they have to do to beat Munster next year. They'll still be wondering what they have to do to beat Leinster, obviously. But like now Munster are up there with, if we don't beat Munster, they're going to win the league again. So like everyone's going to be looking to take their game apart. So now the coaches, and I think that's the good part of this coaching team, is that they're on the front foot. They're very progressive, so they're going to have to be more progressive before the game catches up with them.
What the coaches do have coming up, though, and it's something they didn't have last year, is a nice big long pre-season to be able to really nail down any little things that need to be worked on. Like the URC season isn't starting back up until the, I think, 21st, 22nd of October. So if you look back at the start of last season, where they kind of had to rush in some of their plans and they looked very, very rusty, like it might be frustrating for the players having to wait that long to get a URC started because of the World Cup. But from a coaching point of view, I imagine someone like Mike Prendergast will only be delighted to have that much time on the training pitch with the players over the next few months.
And trust now as well, like, isn't it? Because they did the shortest preseason that I have ever heard of last year. I think they had 2 remote weeks and 4 weeks together or something. It's mad like that. It might be just slightly longer than that, but I think they're the numbers that were in my head. So to try and get your game plan in place, and everyone's looking at preseason games that look so frustrating. No wonder they were. And some of the season was that frustrating. So like, yeah, you get time to actually go away and have a holiday as well, which is the first thing that they all deserve and need, and get their thoughts together. And you need to get a bit of bite back even after winning. I know it's a bit easier once you've won it, but like getting your bite back to go a full season again, it's a long season, and it's mentally, it takes its toll on you, So being able to come into a pre-season refreshed, I think is going to be huge for these coaches and players. And then I'm sure for someone like Mike Prendergast, he wouldn't have had to buy too much trust from half the group, but like, you know, you still don't know the other half of the group. So like coming into preseason now and they're going, this is a winning attack coach, you know, we'll trust he could tell him to do anything. And I'd say they would do it during the summertime, you know, before they start challenging it again. So to have that kind of, I think, you know, to be honest, the other side of that actually drives you in a way that you have to prove your game plan to your own players at times. But, you know, to be able to develop that game plan now with a little bit less pressure would be certainly welcome from a coaching perspective as well.
And then just to finish up on it completely for next season, one big thing that's kind of gone under the radar over the last few weeks is having won the title now, despite finishing 5th in the regular season, it's a top seed Munster have in the Champions Cup next season. So presuming the top 14 goes the way we assume it will, no to lose in the pool stages next season. You're not going to be stuck with a La Rochelle or a Saracens or something like that. There is a much better chance on paper, at least, that you can put yourselves into a position where you can have a bit of a deeper run in the Champions Cup next season as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that like they had to get that league win. I know, you know, Munster fans and Munster people will say that they were still out to win the Champions Cup every year and everything else, like, but it just doesn't work like that, I'm afraid. You know, you don't condition yourself to the level of winning just all of a sudden because you want to or because you brought in one or two players, you know. So like, you know, there's a series of steps that you need to take to get back to that level and to earn the right to maybe go further in the competition. And then the further you go, you know, I'd say they won't win it next year, but like it's still another step up. You know what I mean? So like, yes, the South African teams have been accounted for in the league, but like you still have the French teams who are going to cause more trouble. So like getting a higher seed and getting a better chance at least of going further in the competition will, you know, it just again it's a vicious cycle of going further, isn't it? And you know, another league win and all of a sudden they're back at the top table of the league at least, but in Europe as well, which is where they want to be.
Yeah. Although I suppose Munster at the very least will probably point at themselves and say a top seed doesn't really prove much or doesn't really guarantee you much heading into a playoffs as we saw in the URC. We'll move on to the Irish squad because the World Cup training squad was announced yesterday by Ireland head coach Andy Farrell. A 42-man squad. We thought it might be 45. That's what we were hearing last week, but it's 42 players. Squad is going to assemble on the 19th of June. So you're talking 2.5 weeks away. It's not too long coming around. Friendlies in July against Italy, England, and Samoa, and then the squad, or in August, I should say, those friendlies, and then the squad is whittled down to 33 for the tournament itself. I suppose one reassuring thing when you're looking at that squad, Jonny, is like it looks a pretty good squad. I don't think you could argue against many of the players there. We might talk about the players who missed out in a little bit, but to look at the players who are there, it is hard to look at that and say it's hard to look at that and pick for definite 9 players that are going to have to come off that list.
Very hard because you're talking about players, and you will in a while, that have missed out on the 42, and people are saying that they should definitely be in it. But then you're looking at the squad as it is. There's 9 more.
There'll be people saying these players who've missed out on the 42 should be in the 33. That's how tough it is in places.
Yeah, the 9. I was looking through it this morning, and even going by position, like you might drop a hooker out of there. Well, you will actually. You'll go with 3, won't you? And making sure that one more is prepared to join them if they have to. Between the second row and the back row, I'd say you lose 3. Ryan Baird being put down as a hybrid was an interesting one because I think we all expect a couple of hybrids anyway, as it is. You know, whether it's Gavin Coombs or obviously Mike Byrne is a clear hybrid as well. Like, why isn't he put down as a hybrid if Ryan Baird is? But like, I think between all of that, with Joe McCarthy, Treadwell, Coombs, Cian Prendergast, you could lose 3 of them, and every one of them there'll be a reaction to say that they should be in there. You know, so like, never mind John Klein outside of it and everything else. But like, even when you look through positionally and think who's going to miss out here, it's very, very hard. They've already gone pretty tight with one out and out full back, one out and out poacher, I suppose, and one out and out 7. So like, even at that, it's quite tight. So I don't know. You could look through it and kind of rationally say there's 7 positions that need to come out. Who they are is a different story, and then where the other 2 coming from. I think, you know, Kieran Frawley could lose out, or Jack Crowley, which is mad. You know, so like, one of them is probably going to miss out unless he goes for a complete hybrid again. but he's not going to go for 2 hybrids, you know. So very difficult to see. There's a 9 will come out, but it's very difficult to see how the 9 players are going to come out of that without uproar.
Yeah, it's like it's a funny situation. You always see like when these squads are announced where someone says, "Oh, you know, it's a disgrace or it's brutal that player X isn't included," and I always feel like kind of saying, "Well, like if you're gonna say that, tell me at least who you're taking out of the
That's my
42
big thing.
that's there to make room for him," because you know there are arguments for so many of these players, and even there's arguments over multiple players who missed out. Like obviously one of the big ones we'll talk about now, just off the back of his recent form at the very least, John Hodnett is a player that a lot of people were hoping to see sneak in there and make a late run. And like, don't get me wrong, John Hodnett has been absolutely brilliant for a good few months now. And I think by next season, we'll start seeing him in Irish squads. But at the same time, I'm sure Nick Timoney is sitting out there going, sorry, guys, don't forget about me. Like, I've won 3 Irish caps in the last 12 months. And he's a player who has absolutely delivered on all 3 of those appearances. And he's barely even being mentioned as someone who's unlucky to miss out just off the back of Ulster's difficult season. So, I mean, there's so many tight calls. The only other thing you could say is maybe just make it a 45-man squad and include a couple of other players. But ultimately, this thing still needs to come down to 33 in about 6 or 8 weeks.
But I think even making it 45, like obviously there's been a plan in place, and like you think about logistics of training numbers and how many people are be standing around, and what does that take away out of your kind of work rate around the session and the environment and everything else. There's loads of different things that go on here that I'm sure they're after thinking through, and they're not just not bringing 45 for no reason. Or, you know, even with John Hodnett, I think he's had obviously a very good season, but like, you know, it's the hype is created in the last 2 games, you know. So like if a fella has a very fast peak, I'm not saying he will, but there can be a fast decline as well. And you're not going to pick a squad based on who wins the final. You know what I mean? Like there's so much more goes into it. You'd love to, but like I think you're dead right there. Like who comes out if John Hodnett comes in? And like people are still talking about Scott Penny, and who comes out? Like it's going to be absolutely impossible. So like, and besides that, anyway, you know, there's a lot of you know, you don't want to go into 3 warm-up games trying to get someone up to speed. And you know, if you've ever coached or been involved in teams at all, a couple of people who are getting up to speed with a game plan can absolutely affect how you go. Like you might win games and stuff like that, but you won't get to the same level. You won't be humming like you'd like to be. So like if they're going to analyze their preseason games, or if they're going to work on certain combinations, you can't have more variables going in there that you're unsure about. So like I think, you know, this squad was picked in the Six Nations, like it wasn't picked the other day. You might have had a couple of variables and a couple of fellas in the 42. But like Andy Farrell has said, that it's not going to be a 33-man squad. You're going to need more going to a World Cup. Luckily, it's close enough that you'll be able to get them there without having to have them or fly them across halfway across the world. So they'll be able to pick it up fairly quickly. So I think there's a little bit of maths on 42 versus 45, but bringing a fella in out of the cold and expecting him to get up to the speed of things and to get the same level of feeling around that success and what has happened and the story that's been told in the last 2 years, you know, anyone who's in there has been part of that story as well. Like,
so even like to follow up on that, would you even say that if we're talking about factor in the couple of down weeks the squad are going to have in this training camp, you're talking 6 to 8 weeks. Is that still too short of a period, would you say, for a World Cup to be bringing someone in out of the cold that you haven't really looked at over the last few years?
no, I think there's a case to be made for some of them. Like, to be fair, you know, you can't just not bring someone in. But like, I think overall, you know, there's a case to be made for many people. Like even Antoine Frisch, I think if there's going to be a direct replacement for Gary Ringrose, you know, I don't even want to say it out loud, but like if he's not going to play, GCP plays not so similarly, but like he's the same kind of style in one sense. I always get kind of comparisons in my own head with the 2 of them. They're not huge guys, I suppose, in the middle of the field. But like you can't just bring in 6 or 7 fellas different to what you've had before and expect them all to get up to the same pace. But you could make the argument for that, you know. So like if you had, I think John Klein is the biggest one because he's a bit of an enforcer inside in your pack. Like you look at what he does in maul defense and in his defense in general, but also like I think his attack is probably what's going to let him down. He doesn't have the handling maybe as what the other fellas have, but like so you need to be a really rounded player to get into an Andy Farrell squad. You know, I think that's part of it. You could make the argument for him going in ahead of Joe McCarthy or Kieran Treadwell, but like again, they've been in there, they know the crack. They're still very good ball players for the position they're playing in. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. So you could make the argument for two players to go in there, I think, but like they're still going to come back out anyway with the 33-man thing, like, so we can talk about it, but they're not going to get there at the end of the day.
Yeah, is it a case really that if you're going to be timing your run, that the time to be making that run was leading up to New Zealand last year, or leading up to November, where you had the A games and you had the enlarged squad, where where Farrell was kind of looking at maybe up to 60 players at a time between the A team and just a larger extended squad, that it was unlikely he was going to be making changes based off a strong finish to this season.
Yeah, like you look at, Calvin Ash, Gavin Coombs, Cian Prendergast, they're the ones who made that run for the extended panel, like, didn't they? The extended squad. And they've done that really well. But then you look at New Zealand, it's probably a little bit too early because things have changed since then. Like James Hume's not even in the picture.
Balakoon, Lowry.
Yeah, exactly. So some fellas who were in a really good position in New Zealand aren't in a position at all now. And they would probably going back to their club form. And unfortunately, that's let them down. But like, that was probably an early run. But some fellas have kind of stayed in the mix from that kind of A game and everything else. But the Six Nations, like if you look at, again, my biases are really showing, but like Jack Crowley's peak came through as Six Nations and getting a bit of availability there. And all of a sudden, a bit of club form gets into it. So like the run was probably since Christmas where you could really put a marker down. Now things have fall your way as well, like with other fellas in your position and a little bit of availability and everything else. Like, but some fellas have definitely gone out of it from New Zealand and into it since Christmas. So I think you're not really going to make a run from the Six Nations to now, I don't think, unless I'm missing someone in the squad there. But like there might be the outlier, but there's not going to be wholesale change between that.
You hinted at it a little bit earlier on, and so you have Johnny Sexton, Jack Crowley, Ross Byrne, Kieran Frawley. I think the logic is that if you're talking out half succession, it's Johnny Sexton, and then Crowley and Byrne are level or one's ahead of the other. That part of it is irrelevant for now. I'm kind of talking about bringing Kieran Frawley into it, where if you're working off the constraints of a 33-man squad, do you think it's potential that we could see one of Crowley or Byrne miss out at the expense of Frawley, who is covering across positions? Crowley obviously offers that as well, where he's played at out half and centre and at full back for Munster as well. I mean, all of a sudden, is Ross Byrne looking like the one who might be in danger?
I don't think so.
I'm literally running through this in my head. I hadn't actually noted that one down. It was just when you said it, I'm running through the options in my head.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it, it's a specialist position. You're going to have someone that has run the team as well before. So like, I can't see how it isn't Johnny Sexton, Ross Byrne, Jack Crowley in whatever order you want. I can't see how it isn't that. With, unfortunately, Kieran Frawley's time in green hasn't been great through injury, so like I don't know how he's going to run the team. If things go your way, you bring him because you don't need him to play at 10. But like if you absolutely need him to play at 10, he'll probably do the job depending on the opposition.
So if you need him to play at 10, is the alternative just bring someone who has consistently played at 10?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So like that's where the other three probably go, and I don't know if he goes. I think things have gone against him. Obviously, there's there's a bit of love for Kieran Frawley inside in the Irish camp because he always gets back in despite when he may or may not have played. And I think that's right. I think he's a very good player. I remember seeing him since his AIL days. Like even when he put on a 13 jersey recently, didn't he? And I was surprised at that. But he was very good. He's a very good ball player, and he can play across the back line. So like, I can see why, but like I think the chips haven't fallen his way this year, and that's the reason I think why he's going to lose out. Like I think as well, Jack in the last two games has really shown that he can be a match winner. But at the end of the day, they have a lot of work done in camp. I think the big thing for us is that we just don't know. We can speculate, and we can, you can say that he needs to bring these three because this is the reasoning. But Andy Farrell, who obviously knows a lot more than us, would say, well, there's a difference in a tournament that I've been to, or I've coached at, or I've done this and that at. We need to cover different positions, and you take a risk in every situation. You're going to take some form of a risk, and like we've seen with Mac Hansen, we don't know who's going to train across the summertime. So we might get a squad, but I don't think you're going to get the same. I don't think you're going to get just a nailed-on starting team. Someone's going to be a little bit of a bolter within that, whether it's Ryan Baird or I don't know. Like I think he's someone who could do that. But you're going to get someone who's going to train the house down and just peak at a different time throughout the summertime and can't be ignored. Like,
and then the other part of it is as well, like we can talk about this for the next 8 weeks or so. But as pretty much every World Cup has shown us down the years, there's always a big injury in the warm-up games. There's always one incredibly unfortunate player who is generally regarded as being nailed on to make the final squad, who's going to come up with an injury that's going to put them out, and all of a sudden everything we've spoken about for the last few weeks has just been flipped over.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is part of it. I don't want to engage in this conversation.
Yeah. Like
I don't want to be a fall for it.
It is the awful reality of
it is, though.
sport,
it is. And like I think everyone remembers who played at the World Cup, but no one remembers why. Like, you know, so there's a reason why someone gets in, and no one remembers why they got in. They just remember how they did when they got there. You know, so there will be something that will flip everything on its head at some stage. You know, hopefully it's not anyone actually, but you know, the core of the team as well. But that's where people get their opportunity. So like again, there's a 42-man squad for a reason. I think you're going to use 40 of them like eventually, and one or two more just in case. You know, so they're obviously covering all areas with that. But it's going to be intriguing to watch. I suppose the matches as well. But like even going into those matches, you know, someone like, for example, Calvin Nash could play really well, but just not well enough to get, you know, someone who's been there for, you know, 50 caps out of the team. It's just, I don't know what the situation is. Even if you play really well, will you say, you know, if it's a warm-up game, or, you know, we might think he played really well with 2 tries in a certain game, and it might have been a bit of backfield cover you can't see off camera, or something that we don't see that coaches will see, or they put a lot of mass in as a coaching group, and we're not going to be able to see it, like, you know. So it's going to be interesting. I wouldn't like to be making the decisions, because the stronger you get, the harder the conversations become. Like, is Craig Casey nailed on ahead of Crellin Blade? I don't see why he would be, you know. So as much as, you know, our biases are on the podcast, again, like, he's played as a fella who's playing out of his skin, you know. So like, I think again you get blinded by what has happened in the last couple of weeks, but he's a starter for Connacht, and he's an experienced leader within their team as well. So that counts for a lot when you go to a tournament, when you're trying to keep your head on your shoulders. Obviously, Craig Casey is, I don't think there's any fear in that man. No fear of a point either in the last couple of days, by the looks of it. But you know, and a lot of personality, like, is what I'm getting at. But you know, they're going to be very hard decisions. Like, how do you tell any of those two that they're not going?
Yeah. Final point on the squad before we start wrapping up. The way the season has panned out has obviously turned out a lot different to the way we thought it would a few months ago. Has the way Leinster struggled, or not so much struggled because they were excellent for large parts of it, but the way Leinster gave up that Champions Cup final, and the way they tapered off against Munster, I know it was a second string team as well, but the way that season has tapered off, and just given the heavy population of Leinster players in the Irish squad, it's hard not to look at one without looking at the other. But has that kind of made you feel a little bit different, or a bit more apprehensive about the World Cup, or are we still talking about two very, very different things?
They're not that different, are they? I don't know. Like, I'd like to know how they separate their 2 different rugby styles, but I do think it's. I don't like that fact either. You know, like the way they kind of, maybe the players aren't there. Even put Johnny Sexton into the European final, and they'll probably get over the line, and we're not even talking about it, and he'll be in the Irish squad hopefully. So they can be very different things, but they can be very similar as well. Like, if you were Leo Cullen and you were 75 minutes, you were winning against Munster with a maul in their 22, you wouldn't dream of giving up that lead ever across the whole season, and across the last couple of seasons. You probably go and put the last nail in their coffin and get onto a final, you know. So like, going 17 up in a final, they're the ones who had the 16-point comeback, wasn't it? So like, they're massive outliers in one sense, and it just all came crumbling in one season, in a couple of weeks. So it's very hard to read into it, but like, I would read into it to a degree. I wouldn't like to be in Leinster camp now, starting to question yourself, and then all of a sudden there's a sense of desperation comes into it. And like, when is their next win going to be? When will they get over the line? Will Johnny Sexton have more silverware in an Irish jersey? You know, these kind of things. And does that desperation creep into your game then as a result? But you know, the Irish management coaches have been very good at separating these things altogether. So who even knows?
Is the flip side of it, obviously, the flip side of that question, is it that if you're Rassie Erasmus or you're Gregor Townsend, have your ears pricked up a little in the last couple of weeks?
yes, mentally, you think mentally some of those players haven't gotten over the line. But then the other side to that is the mental game is two-sided, isn't it? Are Irish players going to go and train harder over the summer? Or the Leinster players, are they going to get a reaction that way and know that they have to go um, and perform differently, or know that the target's on their back? Maybe the target's not on their back anymore. Maybe people think that they're a little bit weaker than they are. So like the psychology of sport is very interesting, because you always say, oh, they're missing someone, I think we're on top now, and they'll be saying we're missing someone, we all need to get together and kind of fill the gap. It's very, very, very hard to same with the away venue for a final like Munster have done. Will it hinder them, or will they get closer together through the travel and everything else? So it's impossible to tell. But I think if you're the other international coaches, you wouldn't be too disappointed with Leinster not winning any silverware this year. I think they'll think that they're on top anyway.
Yeah, it's funny. On one hand, you're talking about a tournament in 3.5 months' time that feels like it's happening next week. Like, it feels like it's right in the doorstep. But at the same time, there is an entire summer of training and managing injuries to go through. So look, we'll put a pin in that one, and we'll come back to it a little bit closer to the time. To wrap up, when's Cork Con pre-season training getting back underway?
Jesus, we wouldn't like to let you in on any of our secrets. No, we'll go back in July sometime. I need to finalize a few things, but yeah, coaches don't get time off.
Yeah,
it's still a hard part of the year, but no, sometime start of July we'll get back at it.
I know you were disappointed to lose in the semi-final, but it looked, certainly from the broad strokes from what I saw anyway, like it was quite a promising season. Like, you have a young squad there, and you'll be hoping to kick on even further next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, people within, I'd say, even within our squad, weren't sure about how far we might go, or how dominant we might be at certain stages of the year. So like, I think we made good strides, and I think the fellas that came in, Billy Scannell, Jack Crowley, George Coomer, these kind of guys, there's a core there that I think have changed a little bit about us, that we can build on, in a sense. So it's good. But like, even in the semi-final away from home, if you can make that semi-final a home semi-final, obviously that makes things a little bit easier, despite what we've just said about Munster. But and then even on that, we didn't take chances in the semi-final. So like, there's fine margins, but it was a fair result at the end of the day. But we'll hopefully build on it and take a bit of confidence from what we've done. Yeah.
I hope I'm not making a big assumption here now, but I presume you're not thinking you're going to get to see much of Jack Crowley next season.
I don't want to see him at all. That's always the conversation.
It wouldn't be a great sign for Jack Crowley if he was playing much with G next season, would it?
It's deep decline. The thing about Jack Crowley is if he had 2 weeks holidays, he'd nearly ask you, can you play or go kicking or something like. So I wouldn't put it past him in that sense, but he's not going to be allowed to. But yeah, the conversation is always, if we see you, delighted to have you. I hope I never see you again. That kind of way. So, but I don't think we're seeing that guy ever again anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, might come out of retirement, play a bit of J2s or something like that.
At the back end, maybe.
16 more years. Listen, yeah. Jonny, thanks a million for joining us on the pod, as always, and enjoy the rest of the summer. And thanks for everyone for listening out over the last, 8-9 months as well. It's been great doing these podcasts, and we should be back up and running after a little bit of a holiday in July. We'll speak to you again soon.